Today on the Retro Zoo Super Show, visions of sugar plums to dance in your head.
Live from Kakariko Village. Broadcast throughout the Retroverse. Transmitted to the real world via a maze of wires connecting a Super Nintendo to a Wii, to a Wi-Fi network, and finally to the Internet. The Techno Funk Boy presents the Retro Zoo Super Show. Now here are your hosts, Kai and Steven.
Thank you all so much for tuning in to the Retro Zoo Super Show. I am Kai. I am flying solo today, just me and Drum. Well, I guess that's not technically solo, that's with Drum. Drum, how are you doing today?
Ho, ho, ho.
Drum, please don't do that.
I am filled with Christmas joy.
Okay, that's great, Drum. That's great. I'm really glad to hear that. It is getting to be Christmas time here in Kakariko Village, as it is, well, pretty much everywhere. It's funny how, time moves differently here in the Retroverse than it does in the rest of the world, except that our holidays all still line up perfectly with one another. It's kind of like the soap operas where, they spend 6 months to tell the story of a single day, and yet Christmas arrives on time every year. That's kind of the way it is here. But yeah, the snow has settled on the ground. The village has become alight with lights and Christmas trees. The elves are quite festive, I assure you, and I am here. We're going to do something different this year. I wanted to tell you a story. So this has been a tradition that we have done exactly 0 times before. But I thought it'd be fun. So, like normal, Steven can't join us during the month of December, because of his additional work duties. So I thought I was trying to think of something a little bit different that we could do, and came across is that, we could tell a Christmas story. That actually has nothing to do with Christmas, but there's an overriding Christmas spirit to it. Kai, okay, well, alright, so the overriding Christmas spirit you're really going to notice a lot more in part 2, which is not this week. In this part, it's more like not Christmas at all. Yeah, so like I'm coming to the realization that I am not able to justify this episode in any way, shape, or form. Does that mean that we're not going to do it? Of course that doesn't mean that we're not going to do it. Hey, this must be your first episode with us if you would think that we wouldn't do something just because it's not a good idea. But in all seriousness, we do have a story for you. It is in 2 parts, so it's going to be this week and next week, leading up to Christmas. We are going to be here throughout the Christmas holidays. We will be back. The next week is going to be right before Christmas. We're going to end the story then, and then the following week we are going to kind of give our gaming goals for the year. And I'm hoping to tune in to a few of our friends to check in with them to see what their goals are for the coming year. And we also have a lot of announcements that we want to share with you. And the short version of it is that we are back in the studio. I was like, the podcast has been going just not even quite a year and a half, and I'm kind of amazed at how much music we've done so far. But in this following year, we are going to be very, very very intentional about getting out quite a bit of good music for you. And so we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about more to do with the Patreon, page, with our Discord, with our Twitch. Long story short, we're going to be up to a lot in the coming year. And so I do hope that you'll be joining us in any way that you can. As always, the links to everything, I normally just kind of pick on one thing to direct you to, but please do pull up the links. There's the show notes page, the show notes. If you take a look at them, there's a link to a lot of our stuff, and a lot of it is actually free. Our Discord server, we are trying to build that up and get some good discussion about all sorts of retro gaming topics and news dealing with the Techno Funk Boy in the meantime. But there's also our links to our Patreon page. There's going to be a lot of rewards upcoming in the next year. Link to our free Dragon Warrior music. That if you haven't gotten, you absolutely should snag it, because I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to keep it up. And so I definitely want you to be able to snag that if you have not already. And so a lot of stuff there, but in the meantime, we are going to do part one of this story. I do hope that I know that a lot of you are joining me while traveling, while spending time with your family, or trying to get away from your family by putting in the earbuds and listening. And I really do appreciate you letting us be a part of your holiday celebrations. And so I do hope that you have a really great season, and that this time brings you a lot of joy, and you're able to spend it with the people that you love. And so without further ado, let us get to it. The story is entitled The Glitch Between Worlds. Between Worlds. Part 1. Kai. The studio is right by Sick Kid's house, which is how we always describe it, even though Sick Kid hasn't been sick in years. He has parents also, and they certainly have unique qualities themselves that would make for good identifiers for their house, but that didn't matter. The simple fact that he loaned his bug net to Link while he was stuck in bed with the flu would forever dub the home Sick Kid's house, and it remains so to this day. Those things that define a thing sometimes happen like that. You wake up in the morning and have no idea that a simple event will prove important. It might even change things. I, of course, was hiding in a basement closet at the time, so I wouldn't be noticed by Ganon's minions. But my home was spared a permanent nickname because, firstly, no one knew that at the time, and secondly, there is already a house filled with actual chickens. That was long ago, of course, and not really why we're here. On the particular morning of our interest, I was crossing Kakariko Village casually, as was normal. It never was a very large town. It was early still, a ridiculous hour for musicians, but perhaps not for others. I ended up giving at least 5 waves hello to those up even earlier than I was. Slipping into the studio was easy, and I found it dark and cold. "Drum?" I said. "You might be able to work without light, but we cannot." I turned on the light and went to the coffee pot. With an exacerbated sigh, I noticed that it was empty. "Drum!" I complained under my breath. I had programmed him to take care of these things, but sometimes routines would just fall out of his memory. I say that with some amount of generosity towards Stephen, since what was more likely is that Stephen would be fiddling with him, trying to tweak something or other, and would inevitably delete something that I had programmed earlier. I ruffled through the coffee supplies and noted we would need to take a trip over to the witch by the river soon for more of the potion we used as creamer. We always got the green kind. Blue was kind of pricey. Still, it helped put a spring in your step so early. "Drum, you confirmed with our guest." I wasn't listening for a reply. I was fitting the filter and pouring the grounds and doing things that are infinitely more important than my actual job as a radio morning host. Right after those tasks, I engaged in the critical step of waiting impatiently. All part of the morning routine to help us make the magic. It was getting close to time, but Stephen wasn't there yet. Not terribly unusual, so I got my mug, which reads, "It is dangerous to go alone. Take this," and went to my station, which was turned off. "Stephen," I whispered, rolling my eyes. Half the time I would blame Drum and the other half Stephen, but it was normally true that I was blaming both of them at the same time. "What?" came a voice behind me. I swiveled around in my chair, my elven reflexes causing me to move faster than a normal person could see, or something like that. It was, of course, Stephen, and my heart began to settle in my chest. "Did I scare you?" he asked. I shook my head. Stephen is tall, or at least I think so, but it's tough for me to judge the height of a human. They're all taller than me. His square jaw was clean-shaven, his dark hair cut short. He always seemed to be standing somewhat at attention. The military demeanor had never really worn off. Meanwhile, I'm a Hylian musician, so such formality and grooming habits never quite wore on. At very least, being incapable of growing a beard made it so my morning laziness wasn't so noticeable. "The board isn't on," I huffed, flipping switches and checking the clock. It was going to be close. Stephen sat down at his station and watched me work. "It'll be fine, man," he said, shrugging. Well, he looked military, but maybe I had worn off on him a little. All the little lights came on and the needles started dancing at startup. We still had a minute, so I was doing volume tests on the 2 mics while Stephen retrieved his coffee and sat down. The last thing I did was glance at the phones. "The phones are clear," I said, furrowing my brow. "Drum, have we not gotten the guest on the line yet?" "It's time," Stephen said, leaning back in his chair and pulling the mic toward himself. The boom stand rotated toward him compliantly. 3, 2, I counted, letting the 1 hang in the silence as we went live. "Ever wonder what Santa does when the elves don't behave?" I said in my cold open. "Find out today on the Retro Zoo Super Show." And with that, the pre-recorded intro kicked in and I muted the mics. "Elf bowling?" Stephen said, shaking his head. "We're going to discuss elf bowling?" "I posted the schedule months ago," I replied, a little annoyed that he hadn't looked. "Yeah, but elf bowling?" The intro song ran down, so I unmuted the mics and started the show. "Welcome to the Retro Zoo Super Show. I am one of your hosts, Kai. And I'm Stephen. We're so glad that you joined us today. We are, as always, produced by Drum. Drum, how are you doing today?" And silence. We waited a moment, then at once realized something was wrong. We both turned as one to the station behind us, and it was empty. I found out later what had happened, so this is what occurred that morning without our knowledge. Drum had arrived early, as he normally did, but as he did, he realized he hadn't gotten the potion from the witch the day before, as I had asked him to do. There was a moment of panic as his memory banks drew up the data from that day, and he began to scan it, realizing that he had been distracted by watching a pair of rabbits gnaw on some grass and had completely forgotten to go get the potion. But that had been in the Lost Woods that he had seen those rabbits. Why had he been there? Oh, yeah! He had realized that he didn't have any money. He had sought in desperation enough money for the potion, even tearing up the bushes in front of the sanctuary, but only had found 6 rupees, not nearly enough for even the red potion. He had gone to the forest in search of mushrooms, since the witch was always willing to trade for her wares. But wait. That didn't make complete sense, Drum realized, because I had personally left money for Drum to go run this errand. Ah, yes, he was remembering now. He was running a bit late and was heading through the town at dusk when he accidentally ran into a tree, knocking loose a horde of bees from their hive, in terror that they would pierce his metal frame, something clearly impossible. He fled, dropping the money in the process. When he came back later, it was gone. Drum scolded himself, but not one to just give up, calculated that he had just enough time to go find some mushrooms, get to the witch, get the potion, come back and start the show. And thus he went, scurrying into the forest at a rate only made possible because of his 3 legs. His tentacle-like arms were flailing around him as the Lost Woods engulfed him. Now, one thing to say about the Lost Woods is that they have been far less lost after Link drew the Master Sword and drove the fog away. Still, it was pretty crowded and not the safest place, and even still a bit dark. Thieves were bold there, especially when facing solo travelers. And thus, when Drum was bent over, picking mushrooms from the ground, a greedy bandit approached him from behind, reaching around and trying to find some coin purse or the like. What he found instead was a very startled Drum, who jumped up in fright, knocking the thief to the ground. As the man went down, he quite unintentionally kicked the robot before him, who was still off balance from the scare, and thus Drum, falling onto his cylindrical body, began to roll. And roll he did, due north and into the mist at the edge of the world. Stephen and I looked at each other, a little concerned and a lot startled. Dead air. The realization hit us both at once and brought us careening back to the job at hand. And like the professional that I am, I came through like a champ. I am functioning properly, Stephen said in his best robot voice, moving his arms up and down mechanically as he did so. Not sure why he did that part, and to be fair, I never asked him. Good to hear, I said routinely, deciding it was best to just go on as normal and hope our mechanical producer returned by the end of the program. Since our guest was probably waiting patiently beside a phone for a call that would never come, since only Drum had the number, we proceeded to talk about mostly nothing for an hour. This is something we were used to doing. Of course, he didn't return. By the time we were off the air, we knew something was very wrong. He had been late occasionally, normally being overly enthusiastic about an errand of some sort, but this was different. As the hour wore on, annoyance turned into worry and into fear, and we both wondered what we would find when the mics shut down. Once they did, we hurried onto the street, knowing we had lost an hour on the radio, but we were determined to catch up. The streets of Kakariko, while small, were normally pretty active, especially in the daytime, so finding others wasn't difficult. Finding somebody helpful was. I spotted one man standing on the street, but he zipped away as soon as I got close. He was remarkably fast, and I am remarkably not willing to run anywhere for any reason. Another woman threatened to call the guard, saying we had kidnapped the princess. Only one lady, sweeping her front stoop, noted that she had seen Drum heading into the Lost Woods. And it was there we went, the trees crowding over the roads as soon as those paths departed from the city proper. The forest loomed over the town, dark and foreboding, a constant reminder that all was not at peace. I know I just said that it wasn't that scary, but in that moment it was. It was like in the old days before the drawing of the sword. Stephen didn't seem that worried as we went. Actually, he seemed more annoyed than anything, particularly annoyed at me whenever there was a rustle in the bushes. I would inevitably make a startled jump away, most often with a yelp of surprise, and he would shake his head. In my defense, there are nasty things in the forest, thieves and crows and that other thief, and the thieves like to kick you and take your stuff. All this I tried to explain to Stephen, but he didn't seem to care much. He kept going, winding through the paths, looking around him, studying the area, listening for clues. Can you tell which way you went? He asked me. I looked around awkwardly. No. Can't you, track stuff? Stephen asked incredulously. You're an elf. I looked at him blankly. Are you confusing elves with rangers? Stephen looked sheepish. Yeah, I think so. He looked around again, but the gloom of darkness was always just a little too close, and we didn't know where to go. Hello, he called out. Drum! Nothing but the mocking caw of a nearby crow. And then there was a rustling of the bush, and a scampering and a yelp as I panicked and hurried away. It had been a squirrel. Wait, my friend said, hurrying forward towards some of the shadows of the brush. He knelt down at the end of the soft ground and noted a sharp line in the dirt, a line so straight that it could not have been naturally occurring. Something fell right there or rolled there. In either case, it was the thing we were looking for, a sign that Drum had been here. Stephen nodded and looked, suddenly determined. This way, he whispered, slithering forward competently, barely making a noise as he made his way through the foliage. I lumbered behind, seemingly walking into every thorn and stick along the way. We came soon to another clearing, and the robot's path was more obvious here. A wide indentation in the dirt, maybe 1.5 feet wide, making its way steadily north. Drum was rolling, and the slight decline in the land probably helped him gain speed as he went. The path went straight through the clearing and out the other side, again through a hedge of greenery that threatened to poke me 1,000 times as I went through. But while I was looking at it, Stephen was looking beyond. What is it? I asked, but the only reply I got was him pointing. I looked in that direction, gazing over the hedge where the mist waited. The world inside video games is not like other worlds, not like real worlds. In most cases, our lands were flat, or even if they were spherical, it wasn't necessarily a logical or a realistic sphere. Actually, a lot of our maps made very little sense. A tiny dot on the overworld could be a sprawling city as large as an entire continent, but it made enough sense to function in. And that was the important thing in the world of gaming. Not that it made logical sense, but that it feels okay. But in every land, there were mist, and the residents all knew about them. This was the place out of bounds, the place beyond the natural boundaries. All games have certain boundaries to make designated paths and locations. These boundaries are much more formal than in the real world. In the real world, the sidewalk is set aside for walking, but is just as easy to walk on the grass. Not so in the gaming world. Getting off the path needed glitches. Residents learned to do this easily. We've lived here long enough. It was often useful for shortcuts and such, but the mist, the true out of bounds, was something different. It was a place between worlds, and in going in, it was impossible to know where you would come out. For centuries, remembering that time works a bit differently here than in the real world, going into the mist would most often cause the NPC, what you would call these residents and citizens of this land, to return to their home location, but sometimes they wouldn't come back. Sometimes they were just gone. And sometimes someone else would appear from another world with tales of going through the mist at the wrong spot. Since the internet, we've been able to better control passage through the mist, and some distinct pathways have been cut so passage between worlds could be achieved safely. But this wasn't one of those mapped and marked pathways. Drum had rolled right off the map in a place that was unknown. It certainly led somewhere, that was sure, because Drum had not returned to his home position, which was the studio in this particular world. He had gone somewhere else, but we didn't know where. More importantly, we didn't know if it was safe. "We have to go," I said, a wind of bravery suddenly filling the sail of my resolve and pushing me forward. This happens occasionally, but not that often. "We can make a new robot," Steven said. I glared at him, hoping I wouldn't need to remind him about the Murd fiasco. He shrugged, and I knew I didn't have to. "Fine," he said, and it was a good thing, too, because my sail was going slack again. "Let's go." He stepped forward into the bushes, disappearing into the shadows, with me a step behind. The darkness overwhelmed me, but it only lasted a moment. After that moment, the world filled with a hazy light, one that seemed to swirl about me. I could only catch the faintest shadow of Steven ahead of me, his figure like a ghost dancing within the mist. It turned darker then, but not in shade, but in feeling, coming upon me in a claustrophobic intensity that caused me to clench my entire body up as tightly as possible. At once my head began to ache and my emotions began to swirl into panic and fear and terror. I had not known how much the created paths through the mist had tamed the raw power of this place. For as many times as I had traveled about, which as a musician was plenty, I had not before known the despair inherent in the out of bounds. "Come," Steven said, though I did not see him. I felt his hand upon me, one that grasped my shirt and pulled me roughly, and the light began to fade. My eyes cleared, and we were on the shore of a lake, the soft ripple of water helping to steady my mind. The land was detailed and fine, the white of the snow holding no shortage of detail and variety. Definitely not a 16-bit game anymore. The western sky held the only color amongst the dormant trees and the snow-covered ground. It was blood red, the splash of color seeping through one corner of the cloud-blighted sky, and it seemed to pulsate eldritchly, casting a gloom over the land of shadow and crimson. It was unsettling, and I shivered. Steven was standing and looking into the forest not far off. I was surprised to find that I was actually sitting on the ground, still a little dizzy from the transition. But no time for that. We needed to find Drum. I stood. "Harder to follow him here," Steven said. "The ground is frozen, and I'm no tracker." I instinctively looked to the ground, but didn't honestly know what I was looking for. Steven continued. "If he went into the woods, maybe we can find some broken tree limbs or something." "What kind of game is this?" I asked cautiously. It was pretty, but it had a disquieting quality to it, like a chord that was, despite all its loveliness, unresolved, and it was not resolving anytime soon. "Survival horror," Steven said, stepping forward. I shivered again, and I watched as Steven walked calmly to the dead forest ahead of us. He began foraging through the fallen limbs and scattered sticks until he found what he was looking for, a heavy piece of wood at least a foot in length and as straight as he could have hoped for. He took some practice swings as I licked my lips. He was making a weapon, and it was just then that the background haze of ambient sound began to fall away into noises that had always been there, but were only now coming to the fore. It was the shuffling and groaning of a coming horde. A horde of what? I could not yet know, but there were a lot of them. And there we go. I hope you enjoyed it, and we will be back next week with the conclusion of the story. And so I do hope that you'll join us then. In the meantime, have wonderful holidays, Merry Christmas, and we will see you next week.